Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here, and what you're about to watch is part 2 of the extensive conversation I had on 9/11 and beyond with Jeremy Rise, the alien scientist, and investigative journalist George Webb. You're not going to want to miss it. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness. In fact, James Bukarski, who was the head of FEMA, I often cite this because the debunkers, they love to say, oh, jet fuel only burns at 1,500 degrees. It only had to be that hot. And then you have this not melting of the steel, but the instability. And then basically you have this point of collapse, and then everything else collapses. Baker Sky.
There's that metallurgy video from that metal. It's called Purgatory Metalworks down in Georgia. And that guy made the video, and it has like 14 million views. And yet, like, the AE 9/11 truth stuff gets super suppressed, which counters all of that with real science. If you really dig into the science.
Well, again, Baker Sky I think it's on September 13th or September 14th, 3 or 4 days after, 2,700 degree temperatures, and he's talking about people just like Kurt Weldon is being vaporized.
Leslie Robertson even says it. Did you hear that clip?
Which one? Which Robertson?
Leslie Robertson, the architect for the who designed the World Trade Center.
Yes.
He was there at the site.
Yes.
He says he saw a river of steel.
Yes.
That's what he says.
Well, one of the reasons I bring up Building 6 is Ken Holden of FEMA at one of the hearings talks about molten metal dripping in the basements of Building 6. So it's not just secluded to 1, 2, and 7. This molten material that should not exist, that obviously we have a multitude of firefighters talking about on video. Again, in government hearings, if you go to cspan.com right now, I'll tell you right now, Ken Holden hasn't been in many of these big public hearings. Just type Ken Holden in. You can watch him talk about it right there. Just type in what I said about Building 6. I mean, you don't have to. You can go watch it on, it's in Fabled Enemies, but just the fact that this is in the public record by public officials, and yet we can't wrap ourselves around what it really means, it's just in passing, is incredible to me. I still, guys, just so you know, get picked on when I go back to New York for like alumni weekends by the older crowd. Like, they all think I'm crazy. I mean, these are the people that are like quadruple jabbed, maybe more. Like they have severe TDS, but there are a lot of those people still left on this planet that think that the government just tells them the truth, the media tells them the truth, and people, I'm dangerous, bro. I'm dangerous.
Right.
Well, Weldon didn't impress me with transparency in the interview, to be honest with you, because he made it sound like they raided his daughter for no reason. He was involved in that ITERA deal, and that ITERA was that Russian company doing pipelines in Iran. There was an Iran to India pipeline through Pakistan. There was another one called TAPI that was running from Turkestan down to India. They were involved in a lot of, you remember Unocal and Enron with all the natural gas pipelines. There was a lot going on.
And for those that know about Unocal, as soon as we took over Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, who is the guy that we installed, was a Unocal executive and basically helped broker those initial deals that you're talking about of these pipelines. On top of that, his brother, Walid Karzai, ends up becoming the #1 warlord in the region, an opium dealer, okay? And he ends up getting taken out by one of his guys, probably CIA-run folks, because that guy didn't make it out of the room. So, that's how these things work. You get certain levels of power. There's nepotism everywhere. You kind of just alluded to it with Weldon and his daughter, and now you could look at Karzai and his brother. But you burn these people, and you're expendable. That's it. You know what I mean? And that's another thing I don't think people get is the amount of pressure. I mean, we've seen careers ruined. We really don't know who bit the bullet by saying something and that maybe didn't get out. I'm sure there are those people too. In fact, just another one of these side stories.
I think John O'Neill was set up.
Well, John O'Neill's a great question, but there's a different, I think his name is John. firefighter that we interviewed. His interview is in Loose Change Final Cut. You can get his full interview elsewhere. But, you know, he had talked about explosion in the building. They found a dead body stuffed in a closet while they were clearing rooms. Like he goes, what is this? Like they went to go clear a room and there's a dead guy just stuck in a closet in the middle of this whole thing. So they were tying up some loose ends. And I would say this, you want to know more about John O'Neill and that whole situation with security at the World Trade Center and those companies, the Dark Overlord documents really take you through it. Because O'Neill, I mean, they make it sound like his first day was like right around September 11th. He had been scouting that place for months in anticipation for that job and complaining about some of the security and all these different whereabouts that had vulnerabilities. I always, and I wonder if we'll ever see it, I always wonder what happened to those other 2 Dark Overlord dumps. But I will say this, they did arrest a bunch of those people from the Dark Overlord. There was like a very small news story, probably about 2 months after the 3 dumps came out. They found a couple of them in Europe and you've just never heard from them since.
Well, I would like to see them just dump the documents for everything, and don't go through any congressmen or congresswomen. They did that with the JFK Angleton document with the 197 page report. Remember how the congressman who bikini poser, she did it with Oliver Stone. Just put all the documents out. Let Jason Bermas have a crack at it. Let Jeremy have a crack. Let me have a crack at it.
And let me say this about Anna Polina that you're alluding to, right? The bikini babe. She's probably the last person, no offense, everybody, that I would want in charge of this. Like, for those that don't know how she got into politics, I mean, it wasn't just a social media influencer, guys. She's an ex-stripper from Florida. And look, again, you do your own thing. I'm not here to judge. I've dated strippers, okay? I'm not Johnny Churchgoer. I'm just telling you that is an extremely transactional and manipulative business. And all I'm saying is that kind of thing, I mean, I guess it intertwines great with politics, but maybe not with transparency and truth. I'm just throwing it out there.
Luna Chick is her name.
Luna, yeah.
Yes.
Just they give, like you said, it was only 14 PDFs, but one of them was Angleton looked at the, Oswald file on the 13th of November and the 14th of November, 200 pages. It kind of shows some, shepherding. That kind of shows some handling, right? And she's the one who's going to, release it. And now we're down to the last 3,000 documents. I don't want to see this for every 14 documents. We have to go through this.
Well, the one I'm really looking forward to, if we ever get to see it, and I don't know, is that Warren C. DeBrew, who was essentially Oswald's FBI handler. This was an individual that had been outed by Arrested Pena out in New Orleans, and Pena had worked for him, okay? And he was like the head of the division there. He owned a bar, so he was basically, running intel for the FBI. They would meet their assets at this bar. So Pena had seen Oswald with Warren C. DeBrew many times. Now, in 1974, CBS does a 2-part documentary series where they interview DeBrew, they interview Pena, and they also interview an individual that clearly says that he saw documentation that Oswald was CIA. Okay? They interview all these people. Later on, DeBrew, he basically, before he dies, he's part of this FBI book. It's kind of like one of those internal annal books, like almost a yearbook, but not quite. And in it, it's got just this short little description of him. And I'm interested because there's this document that is contended on whether it's real or not that I've reported on for many years between John McCone, the head of the CIA, and the head of the Secret Service. And it essentially says that Oswald was CIA and he was trained by the Office of Naval Intelligence, okay? And in there, they also say maybe in his time in Russia, they actually talk about the possibility in this document of him having a brain chip, basically, like a mind control apparatus. It's a very interesting document. So when I find out that DeBrew is a real person, and then I find this. I'm like, huh. And then, and these are the documents that I'm waiting for, I find out that DeBrew did the initial overnight investigation of the assassination itself. And he did it from Dallas because he followed Oswald from Dallas in the weeks before the assassination to be there. And then they put him in charge of the initial 800-page investigation. Now, whether or not that's a whitewash, I don't know, because we don't have it. That's not part of the documents. But the only reason that I know that he followed him to Texas, aside from that little blurb that said that he did the initial 800-page, is when Trump did that initial document dump in 2017 and 18, those two file dumps. The first one had the documents where DeBrew got reassigned from New Orleans to Texas to follow Oswald. So I had like 4 or 5 documents of that actually happening. I have yet to be able to find the documents of this, again, this 800-page investigation. Who knows? It might be genuine, right? I think the jury's out on how much Oswald knew about the operation and how involved he was. He was obviously doing black ops, right? He's not a dumb guy. He knows all these languages. He speaks rather well. He's got 2 wives and a girlfriend at this point. If that doesn't speak Spook Central to you, I don't know what, like, you obviously haven't studied the craft, right? So,
yeah, he was stationed at Atsugi Air Force in Japan, which is where they ran the U-2 spy plane out of. It was the CIA's most top secret operation during that time period. And also, he had a medical. He got gonorrhea, and normally you'd get a dishonorable but he had like a excused for the line. It said in the medical report that he incurred the gonorrhea in the line of duty.
Yeah.
So what was he doing? Courting with strippers or something, like in the line of duty?
Or, there's a lot of talk now. And, a lot of the Israel stuff has come out in the last, several years. I've got a great book here. I think it's by Ken McCarthy on RFK and JFK and their battle against Zionism. I remember many, many years ago, Michael Collins Piper talking about the Israeli connection to the JFK assassination. I think that is something I want to keep pretty secret because it looks like there is some operational value. And then the other big thing that I'd only heard of in the last several years is the biolabs and the fact that David Ferry was into cancer research and had all these mice. And the girlfriend of Oswald, who's still alive to this day, said that he was involved. So
yeah.
He may
Judith
have been
Ferry
just
Baker. I've been trying to get her on.
Yeah, he might have just been sleeping around with personnel in scientific or medical facilities for whatever reasons, to be part of those programs and see what they were up to. It might have been infiltrating similar things overseas. Like when you're in the CIA, that's what you are a people person, right? Even when I had Schaefer on, like the last thing he says, he's like, I know what I'm going to say is going to sound totally wild and just like totally inverted. He goes, I've dedicated my life to spycraft. And he's like, in order to do that, you've got to lie, you've got to cheat, you've got to steal, you got to manipulate. But you've got to do it in an ethical manner. So you got to understand, man, these people that get into this, they kind of draw their own lines, but where those lines are extremely blurred. Anytime I'm around somebody that might rub me the way of that, and look, the really good ones, I guess they wouldn't rub me that way. Or, Patrick Byrne is a really good example of that. Like, I was around Patrick Byrne quite a bit the last 2.5 years. I kept my distance. And that was long before this story of him working with the CIA and the FBI and, the Democrats and all that other stuff. There's always something about those people that are just and again, Patrick Byrne's a billionaire, right? And maybe not now, but at the time of recruitment, very much in that circle or close to that circle. So that also tells you that it's not just like the low rank guys like Oswald. It's the bigger level guys they'll recruit or compromise and make them work for you. We talked about Robert Maxwell before. You look at a guy like Byrne, and he's in tech, he's in political circles. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I'm just saying, like, I'm not saying Schaefer's a bad guy. All I know is lies don't make friends, and I'm probably not cut out for the spy arena.
It's about 15 of those 19 hijackers on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. And I believe like 13 of those 15 got their visas through one Saudi embassy in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And there's a whistleblower named Michael J. Springman, or J. Michael Springman. If people want to look that up, they can find it in his testimony. He's still around, and all these people are, like Kurt said, all these people are ready to go. They're ready to testify. They have the victims' families. They got the Jersey girls. They got all these firefighters. They got everybody ready to go on this. All it takes is Trump's got to get enough. We got to show enough momentum in this country to get Trump behind the whole the whole project. And I remember back in like 2006, 7, how big the 9/11 truth movement was. I mean, there was banners on highways across the country, like everywhere and stuff. We just there was no one in power in this country to do anything about it. Imagine if we could reignite that like fever and bring that back.
Going to be tough against the algorithm, bro. And just because you mentioned J. Michael Springman, and I think it's really important that people understand this. Springman left that embassy that you're talking about, where, yes, 13 of the 15 hijackers came through, because
that was the embassy where George Tenet worked before he became CIA director. And that was also the embassy that John Brennan worked at before he became CIA director. And actually, John Brennan was the guy that Springman says issued the visas. So
for those that don't know, again, Springman had these individuals that had no business getting U.S. visas. He would deny them, and then his superiors would come to him and say, "You're going to give these guys visas." And he gets tired of this song and dance, so he leaves. He then, before 9/11, starts asking around, like, what the hell was actually going on there? And people within the embassy tell him that they are running assets for their asset, Osama bin Laden. So he's saying they're working with bin Laden right there. And then it's years later that, again, this happens, and these hijackers come out of that facility. So to me, you wonder where the connections are and what those people that came over with those visas were actually doing. You look at someone like Atta. And Atta's military trained. He's down in Florida. He's got connections to the flight school. He's dating a stripper. It looks like they're dealing cocaine. Like, he looks like
Huffman Aviation, right?
Yeah, and that guy, Rudy Deckers, is no longer around. Rudy passed a couple years ago, but he was another pretty interesting individual that probably knew more than he said. People have even alluded to Atta's connection to Casino Jack and those offshore gambling and drug rings that they were doing. Kevin Spacey played him. Jack, Abramoff, who went to jail, who was infamous. Very much a possibility. Bottom line is, when you look at these guys, a bunch of them trained at U.S. bases across the country. You had Maxwell Air Force Base with Muhammad Atta. You had some of them literally listing their home addresses as Florida military institutions.
Sarasota Air Naval Station.
And then you also had the Defense Language School out in California, where the vice chancellor came forward and said several of his students had been involved. And that he said the Bush administration had allowed the attacks to happen because they needed them. He was quickly reprimanded and never spoke of it again.
Now, who's the guy that said that right after 9/11, a plane landed at the Huffman Aviation at the airport there in Venice, Florida, and like Jeb Bush loaded all the records from Huffman Aviation onto it?
Dan Hopsiker.
Yeah,
Dan Hopsiker. I did a lot with Dan down there on the tarmac at Venice Airport.
Venice is like the CIA's training ground for agents that get sent there for training. Apparently, it's
all the way back to the China hands, when the China hands were flying the drugs over the hump, for Donovan after World War II. Even before that, it was the training. Uh, but there's a couple of Iranians here that Kurt Weldon mentions in his book. He wrote the book, Countdown to Terror, and he mentions Ali. I think Ali Al-Attar, the whole book's based on Ali Al-Attar. And I think the real reason they hammered him in 2006 was that book outed Ali Al-Attar in 2005. Ali Al-Attar was handpicked to go into the Iraqi government and run the health ministry. Chalabi, if you remember, Chalabi was a Rand Corporation guy. Woolstetter kind of said, let's put Chalabi in there as the oil minister, right? These guys were all kind of handpicked, and they were well known by Weldon, right? And Weldon, is meeting in Paris and finding out where Osama bin Laden is in Iran through Al-Attar. Al-Attar also was in my little spy ring. He was the key Hezbollah contact for the Pakistani ISI group on Capitol Hill. So what my point is when I grew up, there was the Watergate hearings, and it was like I used to go home every day. You guys are too young; it was before you're born. But this may be why Brennan left the country. If Tulsi Gabbard decides, I'm getting feedback, decides to do, Watergate style hearings for 9/11, which is what we need. First guy I call is, like you said, John Brennan. What were you doing approving these guys' visas? And then you just go down the list of all the government agents and release all the documents.
Right down the line. Start with him.
Just because you mentioned Brennan, and here's another reason I don't know that we're going to get any of this stuff. I mentioned the Crossfire Hurricane stuff. If you listened to those Seymour Hersh calls with Ed Butowski, and Ed Butowski, another guy that didn't end up on my Making Sense of the Madness show. I had a TNT show. Like, I remember them telling me they were booking 4 guests like every show, and I saw Ed Butowski on there, and I'm like, you know who Ed Butowski is, right? And she's like, he's a finance guy. I'm like, he's the Seth Rich guy. Like, what are you talking about? So Butowski, gets Hersh on the phone, and Butowski, for those that don't know, is the initial guy that hires a private investigator to investigate into Seth Rich, and then that guy goes on television and says there's foul play, and it explodes on Fox News, and then the parents and the brother come out and say, no, shut up, and it all goes away. Hersh says that that's a Brennan operation. Okay, in those phone calls, not only does he say it's a Brennan operation, he says that one of his guys in the FBI goes in and gets him the documentation that, number one, Seth Rich, when they went to go into his computer, the DCPD could not get into it, okay? So that's when they had to get into the FBI. The FBI does get into it. And then you basically find these interactions between WikiLeaks and payments through eBay transactions. So they're making these big payments through fake eBay transactions, and that's how he gets these things out there. When they go to court, and again, no one reported on this in the mainstream, let alone the alternative. You know who that FBI agent that supposedly went in and read those documents and told Hersh that is? It's McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI, who's got his hands completely dirty. Now, the reason I bring that up is Seth Rich was supposed to have files come out at the end of March. They were supposed to actually let out a pretty good trove. And remember, they told us that they didn't have any FBI files on Seth Rich. Then we had the Mueller report where they, in excerpts, very small excerpts, had to admit that they had done an FBI investigation. And who was part of that? Peter Strzok. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So we don't get those documents in March. Instead, we get a list of documents that are supposedly there. But again, they've lied to us already of what's supposedly there, so who knows? Those Crossfire Hurricane documents came out. Why not just release everything Seth Rich? If you really want to show that these, there was no Russia, which there wasn't, it's pretty easy to do. I mean, everybody here knows that Bill Binney, and I talked about this with Anthony Schaefer, amongst others, just shows the data rate, and look, I'm a college dropout pizza guy. I know the difference between a data rate on a USB stick or a hard drive connected to a computer and something that's hooked up to a Wi-Fi line. And a Wi-Fi line that's like 100 KB max, kilobytes a second. I mean, we're talking about a time period in 2016. It's not like everybody had fiber. I have a gig up and a gig down now. They didn't. So you just look at the data rate transfer And you can see the data rate transfer is not over the internet, period, full stop. Okay, so now you know it's a physical thing. I mean, maybe, like that's one of the reasons Brennan's leaving. It's not necessarily 9/11. Maybe it's the Seth Rich Russia stuff. These people are so dirty, it's hard to figure out, right? Because now let's look at
multiple crimes. You got to imagine like a serial killer that hasn't been caught will continue to kill.
But again, all right, let's look at the Epstein documents for a minute. Now, there's another one that I've been doing since, 2008? In large part, there have been really no new Epstein documents since 2017. All those other releases from 2017 on, most of them, if there was anything, they were the same documents, slightly less redacted. Like, for instance, Ehud Barak came out after that. But again, if you read the documents where it was blacked out and then you read the news stories associated with them, we all knew it was Ehud Barak, right? So there wasn't anything really new there. If they are actually, this time around, going through the real Epstein documents, in other words, the binders full of photographs and burned CDs, the hard drives, you're going to have to indict and criminally charge people. Now, I don't know that that's happening, but you can't release the actual documents of child rapists raping kids and have them be the heads of business or a face on television, and people are like, oh, we have the documents now and nothing's happened. No, you need to actually charge them with the crime first, present that in court, go through that judicial process, and then after the fact, you can release those documents. You know, one of the things that really bothered me about that initial binder is, again, I've been following this for a very long time. People forget, before Epstein got arrested and taken to jail, he had this large civil case going on with Virginia Giuffre Roberts and all these other women. There were several others that were represented by Bradley Edwards. He towed that line right up until they had selected a jury and they were ready to go to trial. As soon as the jury was selected, NDAs everywhere, and he gave them all this money, okay? What did Bradley Edwards and the other lawyer do? They held a press conference immediately after with stacks and piles of documents behind them, that at least a truck full. I mean, you could type it in right now. Just type in Brad Edwards Epstein press conference. They're outside. There are so many file cabinets they brought outside, stacked. That was the civil case, like with I think it was it was either like 12 or 13 victims. In the Florida case alone, you have several hundred known victims. That ain't New Mexico. That ain't overseas, where clear. And the other thing is with Epstein, I mean, they may go, I think it's kind of hopium. They may go with some like small level, oh, you're a pedophile. They're never going to talk about the fact he was an arms dealer. He was an arms dealer, everybody. That's the big secret, is that, look, kids are worth a lot of money, blackmail's worth a lot of money, and ICBM, that's not chump change. And neither are a bunch of them. We're talking in the 80s, billions of dollars of transactions. And the other thing is, not only is he connected to Adnan Khashoggi was another pimp, okay? And Adnan Khashoggi was an overseas pimp. You don't think Adnan Khashoggi had teenage girls? Come on, man. Like, and Khashoggi's also Trump's friend. In fact, Trump bought the Khashoggi boat. I think that was one of the really weird connections. But that got a whisper in the mainstream media from Vicky Ward, and then she shut her mouth too, right? And you know, George, you might get a kick out of this one because I bet you didn't see this. But last year, when there was supposed to be, like, again, that big document dump of Epstein and everyone was talking about it, comedian Louis Black went on the They Might Be Drunk podcast, okay? And he talked about his one time meeting Jeffrey Epstein at the New York mansion. Now, he's being brought there by his manager, and he's being told that they're going to have great wine, and it's going to be a big party, it's going to be a fun time. So he gets there, and David Blaine shows up, by the way. David Blaine, big friend of Epstein. Also a big friend of Bryan Singer, who's also a totally known pedophile. Throwing that out. I met David Blaine also. I throw that out. So anyway, he's sitting there, and Epstein pulls him into the other room. And he points at a whiteboard. And he goes, you know what that is? Louis Black goes, no. He goes, I had the Israeli defense minister over last night, and we were discussing weapon systems. So he's got a chart of weapon systems on a whiteboard that he's discussing with the Israeli defense minister. Do you know what Prince Andrew's main gig in the UK was? He was their arms dealer, dummies. That's why they were getting him all these women. That's the other thing. People think that people were paying to go have sex with kids on the island. Listen, there were the close cohorts of him that they were kind of interdealing. Who's Jean-Luc Brunel is probably the best example that we have evidence of that from the white papers. Brunel dead, by the way. He ended up dead in a foreign prison, just so everybody understands. Hung himself. And Brunel wearing IDF hats on planes with Epstein, like literally in the Israeli Defense Forces gear. Most of these people would go to these parties or go to this island, and they'd have these beautiful women around. Some of them were young and underage. Maybe they knew, maybe they didn't. But then they'd be compromised after the fact. So if you were going along to get along, great, there's no problem. As soon as you would push back on a deal or an interest, that's when the blackmail comes out. Nick Bryant has done the key work on this and kind of coordinated with what was happening at the Franklin scandal. And he's like, look, during that time period, it was Republicans and young boys, and it was Democrats and young girls. And every once in a while it would intermingle, but that was the main thing. And you look at the evidence, look even now modern day Abercrombie and Fitch guy. Like it's the young boys, right? And you look in the 80s, Claude Hadid is another one that, it was very easy to run this model operation because you'd get him like at 14 to 16 years old. You'd take him overseas where in some countries that's legal age, right? There's no cell phones. You maybe get one call a day. It's going through letters. You're competing with the other 6 girls in your apartment like it's a dorm. And then you get brought to dinners. And if you want a job, there's a 55-year-old man right there waiting for you to take you to dinner and have a great night with you, and you'll get a gig tomorrow. That's how it worked, folks. And I know that sounds disturbing, but we haven't reined that in either. And in order to rein that in, and I know I've ranted for a long time, we need to start getting some criminal accountability on some levels. And
yeah, we need perp walks. We need arrests. That's bottom line.
And the documents too. I think getting the documents to every person, and then you can't walk it back. Then like Jason said, if these are out there, then people will demand it, right? And then you'll have the fire starter. That'll be a fire starter. I didn't want to talk too much about Weldon, but I just wanted to say that I do think Osama bin Laden did spend some time in a military base, but it was Isfahan, and that's the Bell helicopter training base that Peter Strzok's dad ran in Iran, and they trained the ICRG military on helicopter flying. It's still there. There's still Americans teaching, and that's the connection to Soleimani, and that's the connection to al-Attar. And so I think Weldon would be a great witness. And I just think this Weldon thing put John Brennan over the edge. It was like, oh, wait a minute. This is way too close to the shit I did at 9/11.
What do you think about the bin Laden raid? Because, obviously one of the big interesting things that people bring up to me is the fact that in the bin Laden raid, they found a copy of Loose Change. For those that don't know, they also found Webster Tarpley's book, Synthetic Terror. He also had 13 Bloodlines of the Illuminati on the hard drive as well, all these different things. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what's that? What?
He was a big fan.
Well, I just wonder, I wonder who that person was in that thing, whether those things were really on the computer. If they were, why? If they weren't, why were they included, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, you know, you had the SEAL
There's
Team
so much
6.
of it that just doesn't sound legit. Like burying him at sea because they wanted to be respectful to the guy who murdered 3,000 Americans. And they didn't want to incite the Arab world, like invading their country and killing their people and bombing them. Hadn't done that already. None of it makes any sense. It's any logical sense with the explanation. And then a number of the SEAL Team 6 guys were killed on a helicopter raid. You know, and I'm yeah, none of it makes any sense.
Well, Turki al-Faisal, the head of the Saudi intelligence at the time, would fly bin Laden either from the Khartoum, where they had a pipeline company together with Cofer Black of the CIA. They'd fly into Iran and refuel, and then fly supposedly into some hinterland, you know, with the northern province. And then they would go. Jamal Khashoggi would be there, and they would take a picture of him in these, you know, garb getup, and then they're out of there, right? And I think that's the whole school play nature of Afghanistan, and to justify the war. And people don't, like Jason was saying before, they just believe everything government tells them. They will do these psychological ops and school plays in order to get 20-year wars, and that's what they got out of it. They got two 20-year wars out of it. They got the Iraq War and they got the Afghanistan War out of it.
And I'd say they even got more than that. I mean, look what we're doing in Yemen. You know, look at AFRICOM. Our military presence may not necessarily be major boots on the ground there. There are some, but our military equipment and our generals and our special forces are there all the time. Again, Rand Paul got it right when he talked about Yemen and said, you know, it's our equipment and we're picking the targets. It sure sounds like we're at war with them to me. And it's like, yeah, it's exactly right. And on top of that, it's not just the warfare that's being laid out. It's the starvation after the fact. And it's the bad look of the president, right? Even today. Like that video he put out, what is it now, almost a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, where supposedly a bunch of Houthi rebels are getting rained on from death from the sky. And it looks like it's just a bunch of people from a ceremony that weren't Houthi rebels at all. You know, I'm sure you've seen that video on the beach. And it's like, if you're going to, not only if you're going to do that, like, you better make damn well sure it's who you say you're doing it against. Obviously, I've seen some pretty horrific drone videos. The big WikiLeaks video is the one that really sent Assange over the top. But then after the fact, even if you're not in a position that you ordered that, you better damn well know what you're posting. Or after the fact, apologize, man. Like, say, you know what? I got this wrong, and this is pretty sick and disturbing, and I should do better. That's like,
yeah, I have such respect for Tucker Carlson for, you know, just saying that in the interview, saying, look, I demean these people. I called them blasphemous. I called them un-American, and I was wrong. And that took, you know, a huge amount of courage and really made me just get so much respect and credibility for the guy back. Oh, hey, what's up, Bernie?
Hello. So sorry, I've been listening the whole time, and I just have to add in my own 2 cents on a couple things. Number one, I definitely would not start with John Brennan. He, you know, he has a lifelong career of lying under oath. So, you know, I don't see him telling the truth. And I would actually take Tucker Carlson's choice of Alex Jones, who is documented calling out 9/11 6 months before it happened, and be like, where the F did you get that information from? Because
well, hold on. Let me stop you there as an insider on that whole thing. Like, you know, obviously I know Alex, but this is not a conversation we ever had. I'll just say that William Cooper beat him by a month and a half. Like, everybody's seen the clip of Alex Jones saying it. Cooper said the same thing a month and a half beforehand.
Just Behold the Pale Horse is the one that got me into all this stuff. That was his.
Well, look, I think Bill Cooper has his big problems. Like, you know, a lot of people talk
huge
about
problem.
Behold,
the driver shotgun. Yeah, there's tons of.
I mean, but listen, Behold the Pale Horse has some really good stuff in it. And then it has stuff that totally discredits him, like saying that the Bilderberg Group meets in a submarine at the Arctic Circle every year, or
But
his
that's classic government agent, where it's like 10 to 15% is the bang on truth, and then 75 to 90.
I think he was just a guy that liked the attention, man. I think that he was a guy that was telling some truth, and he saw the attention he got, and he really liked, like, for instance, the other big thing, and you'll like this, Jeremy, in the book that's just out of this world, is that he says he watched a videotape of aliens showing a hologram of Jesus being crucified. It's in the book. It's incredible. Like, so basically, he watched the 7mm film. But I will say this: he was the guy that called out Bin Laden and New York in June before. I'm also going to say that this is a conversation I had with Jones, actually, because I wanted to see what he thought about what happened to Bill Cooper. And you got to remember, they're both Texas guys, right? They were both in that area, that general vicinity. From the word that I got.
Later on in his life, Bill Cooper said that he believed a lot of the alien stuff was placed in with the Trilateral Commission stuff and the CFR stuff on purpose to try to, like, throw him.
It was later he did that, but again, Bill Cooper was a true. Well, and
it's saying that he just said Osama bin Laden was about to be blamed for an attack. Didn't Alex Jones state that it was going to be on the trade centers, or gave exponentially more information than Bill Cooper?
Both clips are like 30 seconds long, and they're both pretty vague and Bin Laden and attacks. And I think he does mention the World Trade Center, and like when Alex says it, and if they attack the World Trade Center again and use their asset like a Bin Laden.
That's a major piece of evidence, though, right? So it's like, even if you stole the one part from William Cooper, or had the same source giving both of them that, someone else or the original source gave Alex even more information with the World Trade Center. Like, how do you
just not buying it, man? I mean, 93, the World Trade Center was a target and hit. It was all over the place that the World Trade Center was still a terror target. There was all those documents that still had it in the crosshairs after the fact. I'm not saying that like Jones stole that from Cooper. I'm just saying it was in the ether. They're in tech. Like, those guys were both very. You got to understand.
I have to put down this fact from legal perspective. That is premeditated information, and that both of them needs to be investigated in the court, and who fed them this stuff, because it shows prior knowledge regardless. And if you're saying like it's either they just predicted,
well, no, when I'm saying in the ether, I mean they're on.
Well, what about the X-Files?
What I'm saying is there was a network.
That show, the script.
Hold on. What I'm saying is there was a network in Texas where there was shortwave radio, there was GCN, which is like, internet radio, very, very rare, where like there was just a handful of guys that were on the air in that area, and they were all listening to each other. John Statmiller was another person that was during that era. So all I'm saying is, from listening to the old school 90s stuff from them, Bin Laden had been brought up. World Trade Center had been brought up. I don't necessarily think that anybody had direct knowledge of anything. I think that they were listening to each other and kind of borrowing from each other's research. Going back to how William Cooper died, for those that don't know, he got in a shootout with police. But again, I had asked Jones about that, and he told me, and again, who knows, but he said that William Cooper knew that he was about to be arrested for tax evasion, because they'd come around and said that we're going to have to serve these warrants. He went down to the sheriff's office with his gun, and he said, anybody comes to my house to come and arrest me for this, I'm going to shoot. And he did. He killed a guy. They came to arrest him. He killed the sheriff, and then they killed him. They didn't ask questions. They unloaded on him. That was it. And
so clearly had sources.
Well, I'm just saying that he was going to be arrested for tax evasion. And look, I don't know that Cooper had sources on. I think Cooper put out some good stuff. I think he put out some really goofy stuff. I think that
with Alex.
I think that a lot of people are ego driven Also, I think again, you look at somebody like Robert
He
Lazar.
was also a pioneer before the internet when this was all VHS tapes.
Sure.
And that's how I started with loose change. We bought a tower stack, and I used to run 10 copies at a time, and I'd burn stacks and stacks of them, and I'd put them all over Harvard, MIT, BU, everywhere, every college in Boston I would go to, Emerson,
And look, before I did those films, I literally, before burning DVDs, I was burning CDRs of lectures from David Icke or Alex Jones's Road to Tyranny, or really how I met the other loose change guys is that I was giving out discs of just raw videos of the demolition of the towers that had shown the squibs, that people didn't have those videos. And I had, a third and fourth video of the underside of the plane and the supposed flash, that whole let's roll 911.org thing.
Have all of these original footages?
What's that?
Do you still have all of the original copies of these videos?
Oh, yeah.
I
got them. Oh, yeah. Of course I do. I mean, listen, I'm a info junkie. I have stacks of hard drives. I still have the original burned DVDs that were sent to us from C-SPAN that you could order. Basically, before they had the archive site and you could just digitally download everything, you would go in for DVDs and they would burn them to disc. And so I have a bunch of the 9/11 hearings on DVD burned directly from C-SPAN. The other archive that I used when we got in was a thing called the Vanderbilt TV archive. And I encourage people to use it to this day because it's excellent. But basically, I had all television from the 50s from the major networks. So I'd go through on dates and news stories and try to get these news clips, and you could order them by segment, but you'd only get like a short little bit. So you didn't even have the whole transcript of the segment. And so I'd put in my order for like 4 or 5 clips. It'd be like $137. I'd wait, I don't know, a week or two. All of a sudden, I'd get a burned disc from, which I was supposed to return. I never did. It's supposed to be a library thing. And I would get the raw footage from there. But the footage that I mainly showed to those guys before I would order from DVD were from the Nutella networks, Morpheus, Kazaa, basically a bunch of the peer-to-peer programs before LimeWire. Everybody was big on like LimeWire and BearShare. I was way before that. And I would literally...
Jason, do you understand you might have the largest,
probably not
vault of evidence for
I know some people.
The new commission?
They have been digitized. So much of this has been, some of the stuff has been digitized.
All of it has, and I'm guaranteeing you, like in 2025 at this point, I bet like probably 50% of it has been like altered in some way. So what we should do is on September 11th, 2025, do a full day stream of uploading all of your original videos, but you need to like record them first before it connects to the internet, because there's the possibility that shit's tagged and it's been expunged.
Well, listen, man, I've seen a bunch of the bad edited videos. The no plane people who will literally edit out the plane. On some they didn't want you to see this. I'm like, you took 4 frames and you cloned over the thing.
So you have digital copies, but on analog assets. So it's like a book, right? It's like you can't be altered. And that it's for all of the ridiculous conspiracy theories that have been put forward and come out since, that by reviewing all of the original footage and showing it all, it's like, well, here's all of the firefighters with the bomb blast happening, their testimony, even though most of them are dead now, shows that they're there. The different planes showing, or the plane angles showing that, oh, that actually is a plane, definitely not a hologram, or is it not a passenger plane? Is it a military plane? And that we need to pressure for a real 9/11 investigation and declassification. And the second major thing that should be FOIA'd is the Pentagon security cameras, because how did the most secure building in the world only have a couple of grainy freaking picture captures, yet somehow there was also a bunch of Israelis with a van that supposedly had explosive in it that were positioned recording it and seeing cheering.
But those are separate incidents. That's the
That's
whole thing.
issue.
The guys on the
Absolutely,
roof are
but I'm
different.
just saying,
Pentagon,
like,
though. The
for
Pentagon's really
comparison,
important to
how is
talk about, and there's a lot of issues with the Pentagon. I mean,
oh yeah,
the
like it
whole
was closed under renovation, all of that shit. Obviously, it's a setup inside job. It's like it's just so undeniable. But the actual video evidence of getting the security cameras of there, that I guarantee from at least one of the buildings, one of like the sites,
I
there's
want all the AMEC
some video
workers who were
that will
there to
show.
testify why they were doing a $258 million refurbishment and weren't none of their workers were in that part of the building when the plane hit. Why not? Why weren't they at work that day and doing this renovation and like overspeed? If I was a contractor, I'd be having my workers there every single Tuesday. I mean Tuesday. Yeah, every single day they'd be there working. It doesn't make any sense. And I'd have Peter Jansen, the head of that corporation, come and testify alongside Donald Rumsfeld's dead, right? So he can't.
Nope, no Rummy. Rummy's been gone a while these days. Look,
We can get his buddy there. We can get two of Rumsfeld's buddies. I'd like to see Peter Jansen, who is the head of AMEC Corporation, which also was a contractor who was hired to clean up the rubble and the debris at World Trade Center after 9/11. They were the first contractor on the scene, which is also suspicious if you're doing a cover-up of demolition explosives. So I want them investigated. And I also would like Dwayne Andrews of SAIC Corporation investigated as to, why they're basically the experts on nanothermite technologies, and a lot of their scientists wrote a majority of this NIST report, which was basically a cover-up, and how there was a conflict of interest there with
Exactly. Literally 1,000. I bet you there's probably 5,000 different separate incidents of government agencies or people that did the exact opposite of the protocol on that day. And every single one of those needs to be documented and investigated.
folks, I really hope that you enjoyed this discussion. Please consider supporting the broadcast over at my Buy Me a Coffee, $5, $10, $15. It does mean the world to me. And remember, folks, it is never about left or right. It is always about right and wrong.